Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
It's our tradition here at Beth that during the summer we do a text study instead of a formal drash. Very often we are in Pilch, because it's usually a smaller crowd, but we thought that we would be in the sanctuary today both to honor our board and also in the event that it was too big of a crowd for Pilch Hall. So I will admit that a text study and interactive learning works better in a smaller room, but I'm going to do my best, and I hope that you will raise your hand and ask some questions or make some comments. So at the annual meeting earlier this year, I spoke about the Midbar. I spoke about this wilderness that the people go through, and really, it's not just a place, it's really a character in our Torah, in our tradition. And so I was extremely excited that for Board Shabbat, and I don't think anybody did this on purpose, and if they did, don't tell me, because I like better that it just happened, that this is the Parsha where we talk all about the different stops along the journey in the Midbar, which is really special to be able to then talk about how this Midbar, this element that we traverse and that we learn in and that we grow from and that we truly make our own along our journeys, whether it's the ancient Midbar or the one that we're traveling in our lives today, we have stops along the way. And that's what Parashat Maseh is all about. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I hope that the parallels to a board or to any idea of leadership come through very clearly. But at times I will also make those connections for us to understand how I believe this is really an illustration of what it looks like to run a community and to be leadership of a community, to know the stops along the way, to know where we've come from and where we are going, and to have a secretary to make sure that all of those notes are written down so that in the future, even when that board is no longer running a community or that leadership is no longer in the position of leadership, they know what happened before them and they can look back at the notes and call upon past presidents and say, hey, do you remember 30 years ago when X, Y, and Z was written down in our bylaws? What is it that we're really supposed to be doing here? I think that's Parashat Maseh. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So hopefully you have a source sheet in front of you. I'm sorry that it mistakenly didn't print double-sided, but now you can take it home and after Shabbat have some doodle paper for yourselves. We are going to look at chapter 33 of Bamidbar, of Numbers, verses 1 through 2, and then we're going to look at some of the commentaries. I'm sorry that I'm going to do most of the reading from the source sheet, but when I ask for questions, I hope that you'll have them, and I'll repeat them from the Bima. Ele mas'ei v'nei Yisrael asher yatz'u me'eretz Mitzrayim letziv otam beyad Moshe ve'Aharon. These were the goings out, the marches of the Israelites who started out from the land of Egypt, troop, by the hand of Moshe and Aaron, beyad Moshe ve'Aharon. Vayichtov Moshe et motzehen lemasehen al pi Adonai ve'ele masehen lemotzehen. And Moses wrote down, he recorded the starting points of their various marches as directed by God. By the way, because I didn't change God's name on this sheet, if you don't want to take it home, give it to me and I'll put it in the Geniza. Their marches by their starting points were as follows. And then I didn't put all of you can look in the Chumash if you want to see what they all were. What are some questions that you have in particular about these verses? You can just call them out if you have questions. Oh, sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah. Why do this at all?
Great. The writing out of it all?
Yeah.
Okay. Why record it at all? Why is that important for us to know their goings and their comings? Any other questions? Yeah. Great. Say more about that. Yeah, great. So Josh is pointing out exactly what actually a few rabbis in their commentaries will also make mention of. why does it say that it's written down from their goings out and then their journeyings rather than where they landed, right? Why is it about where they left from as opposed to where they arrived? And then it says, Al pi Adonai ve'ele masahem, these were their journeys from their goings out, which again is not really how we describe a journey. When we describe a journey, we often say, I'm going to, not I'm coming from. Of course, there is a place you're coming from, but very often that's not the reason that you are speaking about your journey. You're speaking about where you're going to. Marshall, I saw your hand, and then Stevie. Okay, stages in the journey. I just want to make sure I remember. Or a travel itinerary. Right, great. So it's possible, as Marshall said, that these weren't marches like an army is marching, but rather, again, like if you're talking about a trip, these were the different places we went. I went to Italy, and these were the different cities that I visited. I didn't, but just some of you probably have. And so these are the different stops along the way, right? The stages of the journey, the itinerary that we took. Stevie. Okay, so Stevie reminded us that their arrival places are also mentioned. I think Josh's point and the rabbi's point is often, why aren't they mentioned first? Why are their goings out mentioned first? But Stevie's correct that then their arrival is mentioned as kind of the next step to the next place that they're going. And also, why does it say if they're not marching like an army, then why does it use the word that we use for army, tziv otam, right? So what's the point of saying that here at all if that's not actually what they were nor what they were doing? Okay, let's look at a few commentaries. So Sforno says, ele mas'e, what does this phrase ele mas'e mean? It means that God wanted all of the journeys to be recorded in order to complement the Jewish people who had followed God blindly through the desert where nothing grew, so that as a reward for their faith, they would deserve to enter and inherit the land of Israel. What is Sforno saying? What's the reason for recording this all down? Great. So Bobby is claiming that this is like an itemization, right? That if you're buying something, here's everything you get for it, right? Here's all the wonderful things that come in this package. And I think that Sforno is saying God wants Moshe, that's the he here, to remember all of these places that they went. They weren't all good. They weren't all easy, but wants them to remember the full package of their journey through the Midbar. Any other thoughts on what Sforno's trying to get at? Yeah, Marlene? Great. So that ultimately they are getting to the land of Israel, and that you need to know what kind of the step-by-step process was before they actually get there. Great. Good. Okay, so Mark is pointing out that they may have followed blindly, according to Sforno, but they weren't always happy about it. In fact, they complained more than they were happy. So they definitely weren't always happy about it. Michael? Great. And so I think in that, using that as a metaphor then for this connection I'm trying to make to the board, what we recognize, and for those of us who have sat through a few board meetings, you know that not every board meeting is going to be easy, right? There are going to be hard conversations that are going to come up. People are going to say things that make other people feel uncomfortable, but decisions are going to have to be made. And that all gets recorded, right? Because the ultimate idea here is that you stayed together. You made sure that your leadership was still strong. It doesn't mean you liked everything that you went through, but you stayed together to make sure that there was a goal at the end, that there was something that you were working towards. And I think that that's part of what Sforno is getting at. That if it wasn't written down, the people would either only remember all of their complaints, or the people would remember that they arrived somewhere and nothing else that happened. And even if it wasn't easy, it's important to remember. It's important to remember the things that you went through because of the destination that you're getting to, because you want to understand that which you traveled through, I guess, to get to that destination. Rashbam has a little bit of a different take on this, And he says that the Torah reviews all the journeys in order to list all the locations where they camped. So his is very pshat oriented, right? Why was it listed? Because they needed to remember where they were. So that's like if you take your kids on a vacation and they're little, but you want them to remember it when they're older, you might have them write down all the different places that they went so that they have a recollection of it later on. Are they going to remember every single thing about where they went along your road trip to Sacramento? No, they're not going to necessarily, just as an example, no, they're not necessarily going to remember every single little thing. But if they write down or if they have pictures to recognize the different places that they went, then later on in life, when they're thinking back to it, they actually have a memory of it. That's Rashbam's take on it. Okay. Was there a thought on that? Did someone say something? Okay. Okay, Sforno is, I'm not going to read this whole long Sforno. I want to skip a few things to get to the stuff on the second page. But Sforno here is going to say something very similar to, I think, actually how we recognized his interpretation of the first verse. This is now his interpretation of the second verse. And what he's responding to here is exactly that question of why does it say Mas-Ehem before, Mos-Ehem before Mas-Ehem, and then at the end of the verse it says Mos-Ehem before Mos-Ehem. The reason why we find sometimes the objective mentioned first and other times the place of departure is due to the fact that sometimes the people were glad to get away from a certain place where unpleasantness had occurred, whereas other times they were merely glad to arrive at a new destination, hoping for a pleasant stay in their new encampment. So again, this gets a little bit to what Michael and Mark were bringing up for us, which is a reminder that going through the Midbar was not easy, was not always happy. In fact, it's probably where we understood kvetching for our people, right? That's most of what was happening. And so sometimes they were recording down the place that really meant something to them because of a memory that was good. And sometimes they were recording down a place because something really wasn't so great. The things that we remember best in our lives are things that have high emotion, which means either really great or really not so great. That doesn't mean that we only remember the good and that we don't remember the bad, or vice versa. It means that we remember the things that touch us the most deeply and that are the biggest moments in our lives. And as we all know, because we're living human beings, that's not always going to only be good, and that's not always only going to be bad. It's going to be a mixture of those two things, and we're going to hold on to both of them. This next little piece here, I'm going to summarize very quickly. This commentary, Haktav ve'Kabbalah, points out something very interesting, and I think this really speaks to the idea of leadership that turns over, right? Which, thank goodness, any good leadership does not stay the same for a person's entire life, because it is important, even if there are places in the world where there is someone who is in their position of authority for their entire lives, there are still people underneath them who change out over time. It's important to understand that leadership needs to change for us to recognize that new voices need to come in, new ears need to be listening, new eyes need to be seen, etc. And the Haktav ve'Kabbalah is reminding us that the names of these places that are listed after these two verses that I brought for us today are not necessarily the names of those places where they actually went, right? It wasn't necessarily Westwood and Santa Monica and Beverly Hills, but they were actually named for what the people experienced. And that speaks very much to what journeys do to us. Right, if you called Santa Monica the beach, that's not the name of the place. That might be what you experienced when you went there. Or you call Westwood UCLA, that's not all of Westwood, though the majority of it, but that's not all of Westwood. That might just be how you experienced Westwood. So what this commentary is getting at is that it's important for us as people to recognize while reading through all of these stops and their goings out and their comings, it wasn't so much about the names. That's not why it was written down. It's about how the people experience those moments along their journey, and the next people to go on that journey would have different names for the places that they went. which is not written here, but is the takeaway from the experience. Okay, turn the page. We're just going to look at 2 of the 4 things that I left on here for you. So feel free to read more of them. The Torah Women's Commentary is it's a very unique commentary because it really only comes out in full force in certain places in our Torah, often when a woman is being spoken about in the Torah, understandably. But I think also in moments like this about journeys or passing through time, etc. So part of what this commentary, and you can see I took pieces of it, I didn't give you the entirety of it, is it starts off by saying this unit reviews the Israelites' journey from Egypt to their arrival in the plains of Moab. After listing the 42 places that Israel stopped during their journey, the unit concludes with God's instructions about the future. The chronicle that opens Maseh, meanwhile, is a part of our Torah. It asks us to look back, take stock, and remember where we've been, including the many missteps and shortfallings we'd rather forget. It insists that the details matter, and all their inglorious particularity, because the journey, the process itself, matters. Here, then, is our chance, not to dwell on what might have been, but to appreciate the truth of what was, to understand what happened and how we might move forward. So we pause to read each step along our journey, to experience it as a whole and probe the meaning of this stretch to the path in our centuries long ago. It is so important for those of us who are experiencing something in this moment to recognize that we are only experiencing it this way because of what came before us, and that the people who come after us are going to experience it in a different way. For the students who are enjoying and thriving in the Merkaz, they have no idea how many meetings, sweat, tears, finances, all of that went into making that possible. But they are enjoying it, and their education will be better because of it. Same thing with the sanctuary that you're sitting in right now. This is not what this sanctuary always looked like. There were many meetings, many people involved, many conversations. Not everybody was happy with every step along the way. But we don't sit in this sanctuary and think about that. We think about how beautiful this sanctuary is and the things that it does provide for us that our sanctuary beforehand did not. It's really important, and according to this commentary, it was even important back in the Torah, for us to remember that we shouldn't just dwell on what might have been, but we should understand what the truth of that experience was. We don't have to sit and dwell in something that might have been uncomfortable or that we wanted to forget, but it's important to know all the pieces of what happened to make something come to be, to make sure that a goal was met, to know the steps along the journey to actually arrive at that destination. Because if there's no growth, you don't actually get to that destination in the way that you're wanting to get to it. So the last piece that I want to share here is the piece from the Guide for the Perplexed. The other 2 pieces on here are lovely, and you should read them, but I want to finish with this. It was indeed most necessary that these should be written, meaning the steps of the journey. For miracles are only convincing to those who witnessed them, while coming generations who know them only from the account given by others may consider them as untrue. I don't think that it's saying that they're going to consider that which they're experiencing as untrue, but that they're going to not recognize it as a miracle because it's their reality. So, is it a miracle? This might be a little bit dramatized, but is it a miracle that we have a Merkaz? Everyone on this side of the room is nodding, yes. It is also not how the students who are in the Merkaz experience it, which is beautiful, right? They experience it as a gift and as something that they get to use all the time. But a miracle to them, it was not. And that's okay. Right? That means actually that the leadership did their job to make the thing happen in a way that now everyone can just enjoy it and experience it. And I know I keep using these two building projects as my examples, but I think it goes for community and leadership in general. There are so many different aspects for those of us who work here every single day that we could point to and say, this is something that happened after this many meetings, but look at how amazing it is that we get to now do it. Or this thing was not what we wanted to have happen, but now that we're living it and seeing other people enjoy it and actually dealing with what it means for our community, look at how amazing it is. So I hope that what we take from this is that, especially on a board Shabbat, where we are recognizing those who are coming into leadership positions or who are continuing on the path of leadership that they have been on, that we don't just sit and dwell in the wonderful nature of who is in the leadership right now, but also what got all of these people, what got me here to this moment, what made it possible for the destination to actually be what it is, for those different steps along the journey, and most importantly, that when we're making decisions throughout the year, just like I said at the annual meeting, to recognize that we're all going through this midbar together, and that we get to shape it the way that we want to shape it, and that doesn't come because we are in these positions, but because of what came before us and that which we are hoping will come after us. So to those in their new leadership positions and to those who are continuing, may you go from strength to strength. We finished this book of the Torah today, and it really seems extremely appropriate to be able to say that we say chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, not because we are so glad that it is over, but because we want to find the strength to move on to the next book. And so may we as a board and as a leadership of Beth Am find our ways to do that as well in this coming year.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.